In the deepest parts of the Congo, hidden from the world by thick trees and mist, there is a story as old as the forest itself. The legend of Mboma, the seven-headed serpent. The people who live near the rainforest have always believed in Mboma. They say he is not just an animal but a spirit born with the first breath of the jungle. To them, Mboma is more than just a creature. He is the guardian of the forest, protector of its mysteries and riches, and a reminder that some things in this world are sacred. Mboma's body, they say, is longer and thicker than any snake, covered in scales that shimmer with colors like green, blue, and purple. When light touches them, they glow like wet stones in a river. And then there are his 7 heads, each one with its own fierce eyes, each eye a different color. One eye is emerald green, another blood red, another deep ocean blue, a bright yellow, a stormy gray, a dark violet, and a ghostly white. Each head has its own power, its own curse, and together they see everything that happens in the forest. To meet Mboma's gaze is to know fear beyond words. The forest Mboma protects is rich, not only with gold and jewels, but with secrets. Ancient relics and mysterious plants grow here, some so rare that even a single flower could be worth a fortune. Strange animals roam the forest. Hidden lakes are said to grant visions, and the land itself seems alive, whispering in the language of the past. Villagers say that the forest remembers everything, every footstep, every tree chopped down, and every trespasser who tried to steal from it. And Mboma, they say, is the keeper of all these memories. But one day, in the early 1900s, a man named Marcel came to the Congo. Marcel was a Belgian explorer, and he was hungry for the treasures the jungle hid. He had heard rumors about the Congo's hidden wealth, not just gold and jewels, but strange artifacts from a time long before anyone could remember. These treasures were said to be guarded by Mboma, but to Marcel, that sounded like a fairy tale. He thought the villagers' stories were just myths told to keep outsiders away. Marcel gathered a group of men, each one as determined and stubborn as him. They packed their supplies and headed into the forest, ready to claim the riches they believed would make them famous. As they prepared, the village elders tried to warn Marcel. The oldest among them told him of Mboma's powers, his 7 heads, and the colors of his eyes. Each color, they explained, could bring a different kind of terror. The green eye would fill a man's heart with fear so deep he'd be frozen in place. The red eye could burn skin just by looking at it. The blue eye brought a cold that could freeze bones. And the white eye was the worst of all. It could trap a man's spirit, making him a ghost lost in the jungle forever. The villagers begged Marcel to turn back. "Do not disturb the jungle's heart," they warned. But Marcel laughed, calling them superstitious. He was convinced he could conquer anything with his knowledge and his weapons. So Marcel and his men left, vanishing into the green depths of the jungle. At first, they walked with ease, cutting through vines and thick bushes, confident and strong. But as they went deeper, the forest began to change. The air grew heavy, and the usual sounds of birds and insects disappeared. There was a strange silence that made even the bravest men feel small. Then came the signs, enormous tracks in the mud that twisted like rivers, as if something very big had slithered past. The guides whispered that Mboma was watching, and some began to panic. Every night, the hissing grew louder. At first it was faint, like a distant wind, but soon it was clear, an eerie, spine-chilling sound that circled their camp, as if something large was slithering just beyond the trees. The men tried to sleep, but many lay awake, staring into the darkness, wondering if the stories were true. On the 3rd night, 3 men went missing. Their belongings were scattered, their tents torn open, and the ground was marked with deep, snake-like grooves. Marcel ordered his men to press on, too proud to turn back. Finally, after days of trekking, they stumbled upon an ancient clearing. It looked like it had been hidden for centuries, a place untouched by time. In the center of the clearing stood an altar made of stone,
covered with moss and vines, its surface sparkling with treasures, golden figures, gems that glowed faintly, strange artifacts with symbols they didn't understand. Marcel's heart raced as he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch the first piece of gold. But as his fingers brushed the treasure, the ground beneath them began to shake. A low rumble echoed through the trees, growing louder until it felt as if the entire jungle was roaring. The trees swayed, and a dark shadow began to rise from the earth itself. Mboma had come.
The men froze, staring in horror as the seven-headed serpent emerged from the shadows. Each of Mboma's heads rose high, towering above them, each set of eyes glowing with its own terrible color. Marcel and his men tried to move, but their legs felt like lead. Mboma's heads watched them in silence, each gaze heavy with ancient wisdom and rage. Then, one by one, Mboma's head spoke. Each head had a different voice, some soft and hissing, others deep and rumbling. Together, they said, "This land is not yours to take. You come with greed, seeking what you cannot understand. For your pride, you shall pay." One of Marcel's men turned to run, fear written all over his face, but he didn't make it far. A bright green light shot through the trees as Mboma's green-eyed head fixed on him. He froze in place, his body stiff as a statue. He couldn't move, or even cry out, trapped by pure fear. Then a scream filled the jungle. Another man was caught by the red-eyed head. His skin began to blister and burn like he was on fire. He grabbed his arms, twisting in pain, as his skin turned red and raw from the heat. But Mboma wasn't done yet. The third man finds himself under the gaze of the blue-eyed head. Instantly, he's plunged into a bone-chilling cold that seeps into his skin and settles deep into his bones. He wraps his arms around himself, but it offers no warmth. His breath turns to mist, his teeth chatter, and frost begins forming on his skin. His body convulses as he drops to the jungle floor, shivering uncontrollably, his muscles aching from the freezing cold. Each second feels like an eternity as he's locked in an icy prison. A fourth man is locked in the gaze of Mboma's yellow-eyed head, and instantly his energy begins to drain. He feels his strength slipping away, his legs weakening beneath him. His vision blurs, and his arms fall limp to his sides. A heavy exhaustion fills him, as though every bit of life is being drawn from his body. He stumbles, barely able to stand, his head feeling light and distant. His breaths come slowly, and he sinks to the ground, feeling utterly powerless, watching in horror as his life force fades. Another man catches the eye of Mboma's grey-eyed head, and he suddenly finds it impossible to breathe. His chest tightens, as if an invisible force is pressing down on him. He clutches at his throat, gasping, but no air fills his lungs. His face turns pale, his vision darkens around the edges, and his heart pounds wildly as he struggles in vain. He sinks to his knees, suffers slowly, feeling each painful second stretch on as his body fights for oxygen. One of the men feels the piercing gaze of the violet-eyed head, and instantly his vision blurs. Darkness spreads across his sight, leaving him stumbling blindly in the jungle. He blinks rapidly, rubbing his eyes, but nothing helps. Shadows swirl around him, and he stumbles, reaching out to find something familiar. His world fades completely to black, and he is left disoriented and terrified, hearing only the echoes of his friend's cries as he's enveloped in endless darkness. The last man stands helpless as Mboma's cold, white-eyed head locks onto him. His mind begins to twist with a strange, creeping fear, pulling up memories of his deepest anxieties. Nightmarish visions flicker before his eyes, as though his worst fears have come to life. He shakes his head, trying to dispel the horrifying images, but they only grow stronger. Shadows seem to close in, and he feels as if something is lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike. His mind spirals into terror, leaving him overwhelmed, unable to distinguish nightmare from reality. Finally, Marcel was the last one left. He dropped to his knees,
shaking as he looked up at the enormous serpent above him. All his pride was gone, replaced by desperate fear. Holding up his hands, he begged, "Please, I'll leave. I swear I'll never come back." The white-eyed head looked at him, cold and silent. For a moment, there was nothing but quiet. Then, in a low, hissing voice, it said, "Your spirit will stay here, forever, a warning to others." With a sudden, swift motion, the central head lunged forward. Marcel let out one last, terrified scream as the serpent swallowed him whole. His scream faded, swallowed by the jungle, leaving only silence. The trees stood still, the jungle calm, as Mboma slipped back into the shadows, leaving no trace of the men who had dared to disturb its secrets. Years passed, and villagers spoke of the place where Marcel had vanished. Some who dared to go near claimed to see strange lights flickering at dusk, 7 glowing orbs deep in the jungle, moving as though they were watching. The villagers knew it was Mboma, still guarding his treasures, still waiting in the shadows for those who would try to steal what was not theirs.
Today, the tale of Mboma, the seven-headed serpent, is a reminder that not all things are meant to be taken and that the jungle has its own protectors. To the people who live near the forest, the legend of Mboma is a living story, whispered from one generation to the next, a warning and a mystery. And deep within the heart of the Congo, where sunlight rarely touches and shadows dance in strange patterns, Mboma waits, eternal, watching, guarding the secrets of the forest.